Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the new Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about all things related to what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face and that affects so many aspects of our lives. And today we're going to be talking about something I alluded to last time, and that is the third of the essential life axioms that people need to master in order to forge characters of integrity. I call these axioms the 10 commandments of character, and they are a big part of my upcoming book, Essentials for the Journey, Embracing and Living the 10 Commandments of Character, tentatively titled so. And today we're going to begin a discussion of the third of these axioms, which has to do with cultivating a balanced sense of self. And as part of that discussion, we're going to be talking a lot about the concepts of self-esteem and self-respect. I'll have much more to say about both of these very different concepts in just a little bit. But I wanted to review first the first two commandments that we've been talking about. The first being to become aware of our inherent interconnectedness, the fact that we're all part of something so vast, so complex, so awesome, that we can barely comprehend it. And in being mindful that we are part of something inherently, something way bigger than we can wrap our heads around, in being mindful of that, it behooves us to be mindful, especially of the impact that we have just for being here. We, as human beings, have the power to choose how to conduct ourselves during this time that we're granted. And necessarily every one of our actions has some kind of impact. There's always a consequence in just how we impact one another in our relationships, how we impact the world at large. Just how we not only impact, but how we go about mindfully creating that impact pretty much defines our character. All of us have a way of relating, a particular preferred way of conducting ourselves through this life. And that's what defines our character, at least from a moral or ethical perspective. It defines our personality first and foremost, but the moral aspects of that, the ethical aspects of our personality, are best described as our character. So persons of integrity care about the impact that they have. They care about how their behavior affects things. So because all of our behavior has consequences, has impact, and because everything we do has impact, even the things we say have impact. Because of this, it pays us to be mindful. And this mindfulness is the way we overcome our natural inherent egocentricity. We all start out in life as very egocentric creatures. That's human nature. Hopefully, as we grow in character, we outgrow this natural tendency toward egocentricity. And we not only see the bigger picture, but we respect the bigger picture and our inherent interconnectedness and we mindfully strive to have a positive impact in our relationships and in our activities, in all our encounters. We strive for a positive impact once we have developed the heart and the conscience for responsible action. Now, the second axiom that we've been talking about has to do with overcoming any sense of entitlement. And you can see right away how well these first two axioms go together. To be a person of integrity, you not only have to overcome our inherent egocentricity, but any sense of entitlement, appreciating this grand gift, this wonderful, awesome gift of existence, and revering it in humble gratitude as opposed to feeling entitled or inherently deserving of it. When you think about it, there really are no entitlements. Every breath is granted, and every breath could be the last. That's just reality. Now, being mindful of that really makes an impact on our character development. We take so much for granted. It's so easy to feel entitled. It's so easy to feel ungrateful. But when we feel grateful and realize our inherent indebtedness, we're inspired to give back. And the most spiritually evolved individuals of all don't even give out of a sense of obligation. They realize that in this marvelous gift, we have been loved first, and we're humbled by this. And because we inherently yearn for intimate connection, we're inspired to love back. So those are the first two axioms that we've been talking about. I'll have much more to say about them, of course, in my upcoming book. And they were first outlined in my book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, the first and still only book to visit the vast spectrum of character dysfunction. I've written about that just today in my weekly blog post at www.drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. So you can read about that in my current article. But there's so much information these days about the nature of character disturbance, especially when it comes to narcissism, which we've been talking a lot about. It seems like many informational sites and books seem to want to have a one-size-fits-all approach, especially with narcissism, and this just isn't so. Narcissism is a factor in many character disturbances, and character disturbance is a spectrum phenomenon. Too few folks realize this. Character dysfunction varies as to type and degree. There's plenty of character dysfunction out there, but there's a wide variety of it. And it behooves us to know what makes someone tick these days so that we don't end up scratching our heads sometime midway through a relationship, wondering what we got ourselves into, or learning the truth after we've already been taken advantage of. This is what happens to so many folks. And there's so much inadequate character vetting that goes on. Many folks don't even know how to do it anymore. And I've written about that. There are so many resources at the blog and so many articles. So I urge you to avail yourself of them at, as I mentioned, www.drgeorgesimon.com. That's DRGEORGESIMON.com, or manipulative-people.com. But today, I want to talk, as I mentioned before, I want to begin a discussion. We're going to have a lengthy discussion on this. I want to begin a discussion about the third crucial axiom for forging good character. After we've overcome our inherent egocentricity, after we've come to appreciate that there are no entitlements and we're the beneficiaries, the unmerited beneficiaries of a fantastic, awesome, undeserved gift that is this life, and have come to appreciate the benefits of giving back, of loving back to the best of our ability. After that, our challenge is to develop a healthy sense of self. And in order to do that, we have to get the balance right when it comes to our self-esteem and self-respect. And so I'm going to begin the discussion about that today. It wasn't that long ago, in the pop psychology age of the late 60s, 70s, and early 80s, where almost every single self-help book or pop psychology book had something in it about self-esteem and its importance. And according to the experts at the time, you could never have enough self-esteem. And not only that, almost all problems were rooted in a lack of appropriate self-regard. This was the common thinking. Many, many, many books were written about that. But as we've come to realize, as I came to realize when I was writing all of my books and doing my clinical research, and as the current research is supporting wholeheartedly, you can indeed have too much self-esteem. You can have an inflated sense of self and an inflated sense of self-worth. And more importantly than that, contrary to traditional thinking on the topic, contrary to years and years of thinking on this topic, when you see someone acting all that, acting with ego inflation, acting kind of too big for their britches, it is not necessarily a compensation for underlying feelings of low self-worth. This was a tremendous disservice that we did, folks, early on by suggesting that all ego inflation is rooted in insecurity and a low self-image. It's just not true. In fact, for many folks these days, what we see as a lack of genuine substance in the person is not a reflection of their inherent feelings of inferiority, but rather a result of their chronic overestimation of themselves. I'll talk more about that later, but I want to repeat that. Many times these traditional notions about ego inflation, about folks behaving in with braggadocio or with a manner that suggests that they think far too much of themselves. The traditional thinking was underneath it all. They're insecure and they have feelings of low self-worth, and they're unconsciously compensating for that. Sometimes that's true. But in our day and time, less and less frequently so. There are individuals in our times who act all that because they really do think they're all that, and without just cause. So the lack of substance you see in them is a reflection of their chronic overestimation of themselves. And as I mentioned, we'll talk more about that in coming programs. We're going to stay on this third important axiom, this third commandment of character, as I call it. We're going to stay on that for a while. It's a pivotal one. How we see ourselves really matters. And in this day and time, this narcissistic age, this entitled, egocentric, me culture and atmosphere, there are far too many folks who think too much of themselves. And that doesn't allow them to develop a truly healthy sense of self. Now, it's a matter of getting the balance right. We don't want people to be down on themselves unnecessarily, and we don't want folks to have an unnecessarily low opinion of themselves. But there are times when we're trying to develop ourselves in a moral sense, when we're trying to develop integrity of character, there are times when we rightfully should be a little down on ourselves. Where because of our actions that may have unnecessarily hurt someone, selfish behavior, uh, insensitive behavior, there are times when it would pay for us to harbor a lesser opinion of ourselves with a sense of commitment to do better and to improve ourselves so that we then have more just cause to feel better about ourselves. It's all about getting the balance right. The early books had it very, very wrong. You can indeed have too much self esteem. And it does not necessarily mean when you're showing some grandiosity that you're unconsciously compensating for feelings of insecurity. Some folks develop an imbalanced opinion of themselves and their worth right from the get go. Sometimes it can arise very insidiously within a dysfunctional family system. I know of many cases, for example, where an individual grew up in such a dysfunctional home that they were truly the highest functioning member of the family system. Well, this can lead anyone to form an unrealistic sense of their capabilities, an unrealistic sense of their own maturity. If I'm really the best person in the house, that doesn't necessarily mean that I have already developed all the character I need to be a decent person. But I can still develop an unreasonably biased and somewhat inflated opinion of myself. There are many ways that a person's sense of worth can get bent out of shape. And it's a matter of balance. We don't want to think unhealthily poor of ourselves, nor do we want to feel unhealthily too good about ourselves. It's a question of balance. Now, I'll only briefly talk about the difference between self-esteem and self-respect because these two concepts are very important. They're very different from one another. Our self-esteem is that intuitive kind of estimate that we make about what we are worth as human beings. And it develops in an interesting way. It has a lot more to do with who we are with respect to the natural endowments that we have, what we have going for us, so to speak, in the way of innate gifts and talents, uh, our intellect, our physical appearance, our other talents and special aptitudes. Folks who have these things have every reason to esteem themselves and often do. And then, of course, folks who, by comparison, see themselves as lagging in those same areas can have an unhealthy sense, an impoverished sense of self esteem. Self esteem has much more to do with who we are and what we've been given. Self respect, on the other hand, has much more to do with what we have done with what we've been given. So it's much less about who we are and much more about what we have done, how we have conducted ourselves, how we have behaved, the manner in which that we have interacted with others and the world at large, the manner in which we've conducted ourselves in our affairs. So we'll be talking more about these two concepts later. But for today's discussion, I just want to emphasize, I can't emphasize it enough, that getting the balance right is key to mastering this commandment or life axiom that we've been talking about, or that we've begun talking about. It's important to get a right head about us. We can't be decent characters. We can't be wholesome characters if we think nothing of ourselves, treat ourselves like dirt, let others treat us like dirt. And we can't be healthy characters either if we think we're all that, if we think we're so special, so important that we can and ought to be able to do things, say things, and get away with things that other folks wouldn't dream of. It's a matter of getting the balance right, keeping a level head about us. For a lot of folks, that's the task of a lifetime. So these first three life axioms that we've been talking about, that I call commandments of character, these first three are pivotal to overcoming what can be a narcissistic character or tendency, overcoming our inherent egocentricity, growing beyond that, overcoming any sense of entitlement, and then getting a balanced sense of our worth, knowing who we are and knowing what we're truly worth. And most especially, boy, this will be a program that will focus, this will be a future program and a topic that we'll focus on at length, where that worth comes from, where it derives. So I hope you'll tune in again for the next edition of the New Character Matters, where we'll continue this discussion on acquiring a balanced sense of self. I also invite you to avail yourself of my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, the international definitive work on covert personalities who know all the tactics to basically have their way with you, get the better of you, and look good while doing it. And then my book, Character Disturbance, the book that explains the entire spectrum of dysfunctional character, the signs to look for, how to avoid the traps that we face today in our character disturbed world, and especially how to find the right kind of help when you need to find the right kind of help and avoid that experience of what we call therapy-induced trauma. And my book, The Judas Syndrome, written specifically for the Christian faith community. And then my book, How Did We End Up Here? A modern guide to surviving in this character disturbed world of ours. How to overcome the trauma of a toxic relationship, pick up the pieces, move on, and hopefully avoid similar negative entanglements in the future. And in addition to availing yourself of the books, I hope you'll avail yourself of the many articles, the numerous articles on the blog at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com or manipulative-people.com. Either URL will take you to the same place. And of course, these podcasts on the YouTube channel. So keeping in mind that next time we're going to continue a discussion on this all important axiom that I call the third commandment of sound character development, cultivating a balanced sense of self and self-worth. I'm Dr. George Simon, thanking you for tuning in and inviting you to tune in again next time for the next edition of the new Character Matters. Take care.